go ahead and begin. I do like to try to keep these meetings to an hour long. The Open Meetings Act notice is, or law is located on the north wall of the wall over there by the door. Could we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Ferguson?
Here.
Commissioner Morgan? Councilman Gray? David Levy?
Present.
Don Klein? John Christensen?
Present.
The first item is approval of the minutes. Wait a minute, we don't have a quorum, do we? We can't do that, we don't have a quorum. Okay, so at this time, I am going to move public comments to the end of, after we have a project status and a design status. Each person who wants to speak will be given 3 minutes. I will ask during the presentations or whatever speaker is speaking that there be no heckling or yelling out, that we're here to talk about the project in a respectful manner and respect everybody's input, regardless of what side of the issue that you're on. So with that, board comments at this juncture. If not, we'll move into the project status. And Don, do you want to start?
I got it. Good morning, everybody. For those who have not had an opportunity to meet, my name is Don Molman. I work with Burlington Capital on behalf of ownership for the project. So I would share with the group.
Can you hang on one second?
Sure.
Let me check. Can you come here so they can hear you better?
Sure.
Since you're back.
Or you could come over here.
Yeah, I think it'd be, I don't know they'd hear you if you stay there.
I can do that for sure.
All right, thank you. It's not, no. Oh, it just came.
Hello, Ben.
How's it going today?
Good. Is that a quorum? Yes.
As I mentioned, I'm with Burlington Capital, working on behalf of ownership of the project. I would share with the group and also the public that are participating here that we have worked diligently on the project from a standpoint of planning, programming, and looking at all the logistics. And there's a lot of puzzle pieces to this project, a lot of detail that I think is shaping up. You might imagine, I think we've all heard about the Chin report. Some of us have had opportunity to read that, study that. I would share, and Bruce will speak to this in more detail, but through HDR's efforts and really the project team, there have been a lot of meetings with user groups and getting all the defined data and information that we will need to assemble the project appropriately and provide the best value possible to make sure we meet all the functionalities. By way of due diligence thus far, we have had completion of soils investigation preliminarily. These are borings that will identify the soil conditions specific to the structural engineer. So that information is valuable, relevant to establishing the final structure. We've also completed the survey work. There is pretty significant grade change for those who have observed the site closely, and I think most have, that we will accommodate relevant to the design process. So that information is extremely valuable also. From a standpoint of the program as that takes shape, again, Bruce will share with you kind of the derivation of the plans to date. We are definitely in a mode of design to budget. There is a $120 million budget for, in essence, the Justice Center, which is the 10-story tower, the youth center, and the skywalk. So as we work through that, we make progress. Things aren't as easy as they sound when you start talking about the numbers, but we're being very diligent and working forward in that regard to make sure that we will deliver on budget. From a schedule standpoint, we're tracking as anticipated. Schematic design is a phase in the early stages that basically takes a concept plan that is derived from programming and then evolves into schematic floor plans. And that basically then becomes the orientation and the layout of the building based upon all the information from ownership and user groups and everyone involved in the project. From there, we move into design development, which is a more complete design. It starts to identify the logistics, specifics of the projects, finishes, that type of thing, because that's an extremely important phase. That will be in about February of next year. And that will be important because then we will go into contract documents, which is the full execution of the drawings and everything associated with the project as a whole. Those documents would be completed mid-year of next year, 2019, so around June. We're also working with the Building Commission relevant to competitive bidding process for subs and suppliers. Kiewit will be providing the services for construction management, and it's certainly an integral part of the project team along with HDR, Burlington, and certainly everyone at this table, and lots and lots of users that are providing input. So I'd be happy to answer any questions from the board at this time. I think Bruce will probably answer some of those.
Bruce, you want to?
Okay, thank you. My name's Bruce Carpenter. I'm with HDR. As Don said, we've been working primarily on what we call space analysis, and it's meeting with all of the departments or the people that will be using the facility, the judges, the attorneys, the people in probation that will be or plan to be in the building, as well as the youth detention or the youth center. And we have, just to give you an idea of how we structure that process, we have a team that includes a gentleman from our Dallas office that has deep experience in youth centers and actually is an architect that has been working with youth centers for a long time in design, but also has worked on the other side in social programs for youth, and has developed a good understanding of what those needs are. And those are the kinds of people that we find really valuable, that have worked on both sides in the design, but also as someone that's been in the social side providing services for kids. We also have a lady, and our architect from our Dallas office is Paul Chissant. He's been here several times, and they've been leading these meetings with the users. We've had 3 sessions, and we're, I would say, about in the middle of that analysis. We have an architect from our Los Angeles office, Kate Diamond, who has experience in court design and all of the support services around courts planning, and have had good dialogue with the juvenile judges in that regard, and the attorneys as well, providing space for the attorneys. And then locally we have a really talented team that has been that I've worked with, David Lemke, who's a lead architect, and David and I have done many community projects together over the past 2 decades, and we're not like a married couple, but we can finish each other's sentences, and I have a lot of respect for David. David's been integral in the process. So we gain information and have dialogue, and we meet weekly with the full team that includes George and Kiewit and Don, and we're looking at a long vision. If you look at the Hall of Justice, that's 106 years since it was built, so it's been in use for a long time. And when we approach buildings, civic buildings especially, we're assuming that the owner isn't going to change, that the Douglas County is going to continue to serve the community for another 100 years, and that's how we approach these designs. So a lot of our time is thinking what's in the future. You know, a lot of the kids that will use this facility over most of its life haven't been born yet, and you think about the culture that they'll be raised in. Even the kids today, you know, in 15 years is when they'll may, if they act out, will start to enter the system. And so we think a lot about the future, and realizing also that for this year is the first time that over 50% of the world population lives in an urban environment. I mean, there's big dynamics that are changing, and we think that there's going to continue to be changes from today in the juvenile justice system that are going to be better for everyone involved. So those are the things we're looking at. We're trying to set up a design that facilitates a transformative process for the Douglas County juvenile justice system. In doing that, we talk to and look at other facilities across the country, and what we're hearing is the benefits of having everything located together, and the synergy that happens with that, the ability for the kids to have more interaction, whether it's a simpler move to the courtroom, interaction with their attorney, interaction with probation, to allow the family to have that same interaction, hoping to have immediate communication that will reduce the length of stay and reduce then the average daily population. That's what we're seeing in those types of activities. And they're pretty dramatic. The facilities that have combined are seeing dramatic results. The facilities that haven't combined, that we talked to, that built new, wish they would have combined services. So we're trying to be progressive, and as Wayne Gretzky would say, we're trying to skate to where the puck is going to be and try and identify that as well as we can. And so we look to a lot of sources, not just the experience that we have, but the other communities. In any case, the design needs to be tuned to our community, Douglas County, because every county is unique, and the demographics are unique, and the needs are unique. So we take a lot of time in listening. Before we're done with this process, we'll probably have talked to over 100 people that have used the building, or people in the community that are providing the social services. So that's where we're at in the process, and I would say we're a little more than halfway through that process. If you remember, if you may or may not know, but at the end of May we presented kind of a analysis of sites that we looked at in the commissioners meeting, a public meeting, and it was the result of that was published, or there was an article in the Omaha World Herald that outlined that, and I think that's probably where it became more public. Although the Chin report that was referenced was presented to the Omaha Public Building Commission in January, I believe, and that also was covered in the World Herald and on the local media as well. So both of those. We've been moving forward in the process, and we have a schedule to maintain. And in the design and construction industry, money, the budget, designing the budget is important. As architects, we're aware of that. Every week we meet, we talk a lot about the money. But to be honest, my side, I think more about how people are accommodated in the space and how they move from space to space, and what are those human interactions. What's the quality of lighting? What's the quality of acoustics in a space, and all of those, especially in a traumatic situation that we're talking about, whether it's in court or in the youth center. These kids are still in a developmental stage, and being an average of 16 years old. So there's a lot of design that we consider to reduce the stress and to design around trauma-informed spaces. So that's what we think about it. We have to deal with money, and money is important, but most of our career in different building types have been what's the human interaction, what's the experience, what do we all feel when we're sitting in this room compared to another space. So those things are important, vitally important, and that's what we consider. Beyond that, the interaction of the programs in the community to help are as important, maybe more important. We try to set up a facility and a relationship of spaces to best accommodate that interaction that needs to take place. So that's the journey we're on, and we're about at the beginning. The space analysis, what we call space program, is like the heart of the design. It's really, you establish what the criteria is, and that's the point in time where we're at today. So that may be too much in depth, but I'd be happy to answer any questions from the board.
If you don't mind, I've got a couple of questions. Well, a couple of statements first of all, and then a question for where we are. And I understand we're still early in the process, but I keep hearing people talk about the Chin report, and we got to remember, first of all, the Chin report is just a study. It's not the Holy Grail. First of all, secondly, and more importantly to where I'm at right now is we have to establish and we have to get it right in terms of what we're going to do about diversity and inclusion on the project itself.
Right.
And to me, among the things that I think needs to occur is I've looked at a couple of different areas where we're doing work all around the city. And in some cases, we have embedded right at the beginning of the process someone who is knowledgeable enough about the contractor pool that we have, that exists. And I'm not talking about the SEB program that I have or that we started through the city. I'm talking about someone who understands and knows really good contractors as opposed to those who are not very good contractors. But we need to establish a way at the beginning of the process to make sure that we're breaking down projects so that minority and female participants can gain work. And I don't mean just gain a little bit of work. I mean to help support and build the companies.
Right.
If we're not doing that, then we're dropping the ball. So I guess, is there a little bit of a discussion about where we are with that process, or are we still in the early stages of that? But I do want you to keep in mind that this is a significant priority for me.
Ultimately, we've had discussions on that internally in our meetings that we get together with the project team. Again, I think Kiewit will be instrumental in that. They have developed a program significant and specific to that point. And I think through our bidding process, we certainly will keep that in mind. Accept your suggestion of some early involvement, and I think perhaps we can dialogue about that from your
I think we should,
perspective.
because I think you got to
how
have
the
somebody
best
at the
approach would
beginning.
be,
Yeah.
so.
You got to have someone at the beginning that knows contractors,
Sure.
that knows contracting.
That's correct.
That knows all of the technical aspects of bonding and
Absolutely.
insurance and all of those things that we have to have that keep not only the contractor but us out of trouble as well.
Yes, sir.
That's got to be in place, and it's got to be. We've got to have something that we can point to the community and others, and say that we are really pushing the needle on this. Examples are we've got several construction projects that are underway right now, and a number of them, You know, and I'll just mention specifically CHI, when they built their facility on 24th and Cummings, at the end of the day, they had about 40% participation, which is higher than a lot of people have seen. But that's where we need to be at some point. So that's just I just wanted to throw that out there because that's a concern to me. I'm highly supportive of the project. Everybody knows that. I've not been quiet about it or silent about it. I think we need to move forward. I think we need to be careful, and I think at some point in time, also in the process, we need to address best practices.
Absolutely.
But I'm sure that's going to come in time, but the initial process that I'm talking about right now has more to do with making sure we have not only good contractors, but good contractors, good minority and female contractors that provide goods and services as well, that are reputable and know how to get this done.
I think we can follow up with you in more detail
Okay.
and dialogue about that.
Okay.
Bruce, I want to ask you a quick question. You mentioned that you had visited and communicated with a variety of new facilities that occurred in other locations. And serendipitously, I was in Minneapolis for a totally different university-related project, and they have built a facility that people think is absolutely amazing in terms of serving kids and community and their families in a better way. The question that I hear a lot is that if you put it in quotes in a neighborhood, it creates problems. What I learned up there is that there was some nervousness about that at the onset, but now people don't even know what the facility is.
Yeah.
It has easier access for all involved and so on. Am I...
Well, it's Hennepin County is Minneapolis, and it's a good example of urban juvenile justice center that includes all of the components, the courts and the youth center, and there's probably been over $1 billion of development right across the street. The new stadium is right across the street. You probably wouldn't know that there was a justice center there unless somebody pointed it out. And there's I think some office and residential that preceded it. I'm not exactly sure on the timing, but they're one that are getting pretty outstanding results in the length of stay so it's a population that's about double Douglas County, 1.2 million, and then Ramsey County, which is St. Paul, is over 500,000, about the same as Douglas County, a little smaller. Same thing, right across the street from a children's museum, and a good active community that's a mixed-use community. Again, you may not know it if you drove by. So, those are two that we're looking at. We also looked at the DC District of Columbia. The city is about the same population. It's not combined with the courts, but it's a newer youth center. And then Baltimore, which is right down the street from the courts, and both, the one's right across from housing that again preceded it, and the other is more in an urban core area. And there's a lot of examples that we're looking at. But
Well, my only
Yeah,
experience
that's
on
interesting.
was
Yeah.
that having your attorneys, your judges, your service folks, parole, and
Right.
all of that, serving kids and their families in the same location had a tremendous change in what the future was in that particular area about the kids who needed to end up in prison in the state or something to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously trying to change that trajectory of opportunity for those kids. And right on their website, it talks about respect and dignity, and Douglas County is along those same core values.
Thank you.
But there's opportunity here to really improve that.
Bruce, you talked about that you've looked at different alternatives to this, and the folks who don't favor this approach have put forth a kind of an alternative plan, and I'm sure you've looked at that as well. And I want to understand that as well. What are kind of in your analysis, the advantages and disadvantages between this approach and the alternative plan that people have put forth with kind of a scattered site approach?
Well, Commissioner Kavanaugh presented an alternative plan not the last commissioners meeting, but the one that preceded that in August, maybe early August, so we have discussed that. There's courtesy in our profession not to be negative to other colleagues. And this is a little different, and I just say this because I appreciate Commissioner Kavanaugh's drive to find an alternative plan, but there's a lot more work and diligence behind working through alternatives, and both the space planning, and I talked about kind of understanding what's the value of adjacencies in the layout of departments, and what's it mean. There's a difference between usable square footage and building gross square footage, and those kinds of analysis are important, and some of that is not present in that analysis. And let's say it's a concept and an idea to put out there. And then so I talked. One of our guiding principles is to design to a transformative approach to the entire system. So in that plan, in the alternative plan, there's I think 3 or 4 different locations of where attorneys would be, where courts would be, where the youth center would be, and the plan maintains the 42nd and Woolworth site for the youth center. So that doesn't just what we talked about. It doesn't meet that criteria of having everything co-located, and for us that is kind of at the core of what we believe will help the transformation, the instant communication, all the things I talked about. So that's one thing. The courts are on kind of in the alternative plan are on a site that's a smaller site that has about a little bit less than 13,000 square feet to place a floor plate and get all of the vertical, the elevators, the separation for the judges and the public and the youth. It's secured, and the separate corridors that are required, and the stairways and the restrooms. So that becomes a little bit inefficient in design on a smaller floor plate. We're looking for something more like 20,000 square feet as a sweet spot for that. And then the alternative was to put attorneys in this building that we're in, and then move whatever departments are in. It would have to be replaced because it's in the range of 60,000 square feet. Then move that to the AIM building, and so there would be kind of dual renovation. I did after I looked at it in the meeting and the cost that was presented at $50 million. I did question how that cost was derived, and since that time, a closer look, it's going to be closer. We believe, and we wanted to have an independent estimator look at that, and it's probably more in the range of $90 million when you use kind of realistic parameters for the cost. And cost is also something that is hard to compare apples to apples. Sometimes you're talking about construction costs, sometimes you're talking about total project costs, which include things like equipment and survey and soils test and fees and escalation and contingency, all of overhead and profit, all of those things. So you want to make sure you're apples to apples. So we tried to use the same criteria as a comparison, and I would be pretty confident it's closer to the 90 million, maybe a little beyond. So we were trying to be conservative but realistic, and part of what happens is a number that gets published in a paper becomes, for most of the public, reality when it may or may not be, and so that's kind of a concern. So that as we look at that alternative plan, those are the things that we've seen, and first of all, if we're able to reduce the number of kids through a more transformative process, that's real money to the county. The cost of having a child in detention is probably the same as the cost of education at Harvard, just housing those. So if we're able to make a reduction of, say, 30, that's a real savings year over year to the county. So it's a savings to the county. The same with the efficiencies in the building. And again, this goes back to looking at being here a long term. If it's inconvenient, if it's inefficient for the people to use the space, then it's costing more year over year to the county. So you have to look at those as part of the concept. It's fairly complicated to try and sort this out. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. Thank you. You're right. It is complicated, but that is very helpful because, like you said, it's complicated, and we need to have full information as board members to make decisions on this. So that was why I asked. Thank you.
Any other board member comments or proofs? Okay. At this time, I will start public comment on those two items. If you could just raise your hand and want to speak, we'll start at this end and come down. LaVon.
My name is LaVon Williams, and I am Director of Reconnect Inc. It's a youth program, and I also serve on several youth initiatives. I wasn't really going to speak until I heard some things. I concur 100% with Councilman Gray. There needs to be more diversity in this project. Even if you look at the CHIN report, which you referenced, not one Latino was interviewed in that process. I don't think this is something that you should accept his suggestions. I think you should make it a part of your strategy moving forward, that you will include minority businesses, and that you also will look to hiring people from high poverty, high crime communities to work on those. I feel so strongly about this. I think this is something that the county and this nonprofit should make part of their agreement with you moving forward, because this is not something that should be left up to voluntary compliance. This is just important because oftentimes some of those kids who you're talking about today, had we provided jobs for their parents, they would not be in the system. The best mentor, the best intervention project is an employed parent, because they can help their kid. And so I really do feel that you should make a very strong commitment to immediately begin diversifying even your consultants as you're moving forward. There's been comments today that you are looking at a lot of sources and you're leading meetings with the users. Well, the kids and the parents are the users.
Right.
And unless those meetings have included system-involved parents or legacy parents, then you're not meeting with the right people.
And we plan to have a family advisory committee that includes parent or families that have had juveniles or currently are in the system, and talking to the kids as well. So I appreciate that.
And I would say you probably need to reach out to the Burns Institute. Michael Finley would probably be the best consultant for you to bring on board immediately. He's with the Burns Institute, and he can help us for making these missteps that we're making, because what I've come to realize is that that building is going to be built, whether we like it or agree to it or not. It's important for us now to make sure that we get in front of this issue, because we did not roll this out properly. So I think you should engage the services of the Burns Institute immediately to begin helping you connect the dots better. The whole intent of this, I know is going to happen. You mentioned the reference to the Hennepin project, Hennepin County. I'm very familiar with that. I'm familiar also with Davidson County in Tennessee. What the Hennepin County did that we did not do is they immediately from day one started out with the parents. The family, the community was involved from day one. This nonprofit board that we're talking about now, that was comprised, when they had that exploratory committee to look into, that was parents, that was community people. It was not system players only. So I think that you're using Hennepin County, and that's a good example. And also Hennepin County has started out with 87 beds because they took into account what their director of corrections was saying is his average daily population. Now I say all that to say that if we're really true about juvenile justice reform, we will be moving toward a smaller facility, because the best practices is going toward the de-incarceration of youth.
Right.
I think that there's a better way to use that facility. I've talked to Commissioner Borgeson and Mr. Chiller today. We need to use it as a transitional facility,
right,
not as a detention facility. Kids who are coming out of Kearney, out of Geneva, out-of-state placement, need to go there and transition back into the community. So if I'm going to have to accept this, I want the one to be used as a detention. Keep detention on 42nd Street. Make this facility in step with the 21st century best practices, where that facility is being used as a respite for families and kids who just can't be together right now, as a timeout for that child to go to. Make it a transitional facility as kids are coming back into the community after incarceration or detention, so they can transition back into schools, back with community providers, and use it as a respite facility. So if a policeman get called at 3 o'clock in the morning, and that kid just can't stay at home, that kid can then go there, services can be rendered, and the family can be made whole.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jeff?
Jeff Stevens, 14518 Webster Circle. I'm with Nebraska Taxpayers for Freedom, and we're watching the process and the expenditure to taxpayer money on this. So there's a few items that I'd like to see made public in the interest of transparency, and I appreciate you guys opening up the meetings for this so we can attend. But there was $1.45 million approved in a previous county commissioner meeting. We'd like to see a cost breakdown of where that money went, and we'd like to see the agreements that were made with the 4 firms listed in the exhibit of the owner's representative agreement. Also, if there are any pending items up there for approval of funds, we'd like to see that, and we'd like to see the rest of the bylaws for the nonprofit corporation. But we got the amendments today. We just don't have the original bylaws. So, thank you.
Jeff. Was there one more thing? Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
My name is Carol Zajac. I live at 2518 North 64th Street in Benson. I simply have 3 questions. Since I knew I wasn't going to get much time, 3 minutes is very small. Anyway, my questions are this: why has there not been any opportunity to present alternative proposals, such as, like the alternative proposal of Jim Kavanaugh, which would save $70 million, and I know that you don't believe that that was the correct amount, which is fine, but it would save the taxpayers of Omaha. And according to Judge Pat McDermott, who has specialized in juvenile detention, he said that it would be better for the juveniles to remain at the current detention facility. And if we are allowed to at least present additional proposals, I think this is moving way too fast. So my question again is, why haven't we been allowed to have the opportunity to present these alternative proposals? When a facility is at capacity, where will the overflow be sent to? Now, currently there are 150 beds at the current juvenile center on 42nd, and at any given time there's about 82. And I know that you're saying that build a smaller facility where there's only 48 beds, and because this is supposed to hopefully reduce crime, I don't think it's going to work that way. And also, why has there been no opportunity for competing construction companies to bid on the proposed projects? So those are my questions.
Thank you.
I'd like to
Bob Heron. Actually, I own the historic building that we're trying to tear down. So I have several questions. One of them would be for you, Bruce. The program requirements, space requirements are not done yet. So you really don't know how much room you need. So why are we going taking property that we don't need? For sure. We can take eminent domains available at any time to anybody. So they can take it at any time in the future. So the space requirements need to be done. I'd like to see them released for all of us to review. And then a detailed analysis of all the other potential sites. Because lots of people have talked about other properties in town that are vacant or available. So we'd like to see the details of that. And then whatever happens, we certainly want to look at the phases of how things are to be progressed and what comes first, what comes next, and when are things considered complete. And then some impact on what the downtown community will face based on what we're doing now. And as we know, we have one Flatiron district that could be totally destroyed and stopped because of what we're planning here. So we need to incorporate those people. And then let's open up all this stuff to the public, like the minutes from the last meeting and all the organizational pieces that fit into all the people that are involved in this. People should have a chance to review all of that. So the basic request from the public has been for transparency, but not just for the commission, but for all the entities involved in what we have to deal with. And so those are the things I'd like to see before we get started and before we start taking property and destroying projects. Let's have a firm foundation. Let's go forward in the right direction instead of just jumping to conclusions quickly.
Thank you, Beth. Larry?
Hi, Larry Storr, 5015 Lafayette, Omaha. I'd like more than 3 minutes because I think Levon got more than 3. And I don't want to be interrupted by Mr. Gray or walked away by a deputy because I'm going to have my say.
Start then.
Okay. Unfortunately, what's wrong with our kids? What's wrong with our system? We need to build another new thing and hire people from outside of the city that have been building these things all over the country. There's something wrong. Something's not being taught right. Our families are failing. Our schools are failing. Our government is failing. And we have a representative here that says we gotta, and we gotta do it now. And it's for the youth. And we have these gentlemen here saying we're planning for the future because we're going to need even more space in the future. You better start analyzing what you're doing wrong so that all the kids need to have a place to go be locked up at. And then turn around and study data prepared on it to provide data so that we can have social justice programs. My tax dollars cannot afford that. All of that stuff should be done at the other levels of our community, not here in a new building. I was in a courtroom, Douglas County Juvenile Justice, a couple of years ago, and a judge, before it started, somebody says, "Oh, that's a recording device." And she actually removed me from the building, the courtroom. Shortly after that, she removed a bunch of ladies. And it was all about some children that had been taken away from a mother, and we find out that possibly they went over out of state somewhere because there wasn't enough room. Well, there's problems with that. So I'm asking you to slow down here. This needs to be a vote by the people. We don't need it voted on based on touchy-feely situations. I'm not a racist, but I've had it with social justice programs. Please don't cram that down our throats. I know you studied that in the Juvenile Justice Center for the last 3 or 4 years. You presented it in draft form, so don't deny it. And I'll end up with this. This went out into public domain this morning on the radio as I was coming down here. Mr. Gray's not going to like this, but one caller who probably gets involved in things suggested that Mr. Gray and his family will profit personally from this enterprise.
That's not true.
I don't.
We're not going to do that. No, we're gonna stop that. We're not gonna do that.
I didn't
We're not.
bring
No,
that up.
we're not gonna do that.
I didn't bring
I don't
it
care
up.
what you said. We're not gonna do
Somebody else
that.
brought it up.
We're not
Larry.
doing that piece.
Okay.
Larry.
Third time's a
You
charm.
can sit him
I
down.
believe
He's
voluntarily.
not gonna do that.
No.
No, you're not gonna talk about my family.
They already did it.
You are not gonna talk about my
I'm
family.
leaving. I said
That's the
you-
bottom. You can get the hell out of here if
Thank
you want
you
to.
again,
I don't
Mr.
care.
Gray. That's the
But you're
first
not gonna
time.
talk about my family.
Okay.
I think it needs to be talked
No,
about.
we're not gonna do that. You're not gonna talk about my family, man.
The World
Larry.
Herald needs to report on
Larry.
it.
Yeah, well, you talk about what you want to talk about, but you don't talk about my family.
Investigated and reported
Do
it.
not get in my family's
All right,
business.
All right, stop.
You
All
will
right.
get in my.
Stop. Okay, it's all right. It's all
not
right.
necessary.
Stop. It's okay. Stop.
Ben, just.
Those are the things that we do not need during this discussion. So let's just
Don't take it.
calm. Don't take it. Just calm down, Ben.
No, we're good. I'm good.
All
I'm
right.
good. I just don't like people doing. You
I
don't
know
talk
you-
about my
I know.
family.
I know.
Leave my family out of it.
I know, and I apologize
You
for
leave
that,
my family
and
out
he's
of it.
gone, so let's move on. Juliet?
Good morning, Commissioners and all. My name's Juliet Summers. I'm with Voices for Children in Nebraska. And there's been some discussion of input from youth and families, and I spoke to a young woman who has experience with child welfare and juvenile justice and asked her to write up some thoughts on this project, and she sent them to me. So if it's okay, I'd like to share those. This project as a whole has a good direction and is necessary within the child court system. The plan to utilize trauma-informed practices in the construction of a facility is important, and it should be noted that that needs to take priority over location and size. There was a study mentioned of recently built facilities where it was recommended that low-rise buildings have been preferred because of access to nature and natural light, which supports the strategy of building a facility with trauma-informed care in mind. I am seeing some follow-through with a facility enclosed courtyard and plans for many windows. I think it would also be important to consider the open concept that the Chin study suggests. Something I find particularly important is the way the child perceives the court process. The proposal for larger courtrooms with space for community supports is necessary, but the child's perspective of the room and its setup is also important. Something to be aware of is whereas in an adult court setting, the judge is at the front of the courtroom on a raised platform. When working with children, they respond better and trust more when adults and authority figures, quote, get on their level. I would suggest a round-table courtroom setting that portrays collaboration and communication between everyone within the courtroom as well as the child. The current setup of a courtroom is threatening at least and can become traumatizing when a child feels small and helpless. A children's waiting room, specifically dedicated to children in a courthouse, should also be established to provide a non-threatening, protected environment. This area, as mentioned in Chin's study, would need to be separate and secure so as to avoid contact with the accused. Children's waiting rooms should entertain and enlighten children while providing a friendly environment such as a courtroom. Something that would also be helpful is to have a small lounge area in the women's restroom for any breastfeeding mothers as well. The inclusion of community organizations in the same place as probation offices, attorneys, etc. is a necessity for our community. This is something Voices should continue to support. Sorry, shouldn't have read that sentence. I see the inclusion of every organization that deals with the child in this facility as its biggest advantage. Access to resources is one main issue within communities of poverty. Families often lack access to resources and prevention supports due to lack of time and transportation. I believe there are many resources and support organizations within the community that should be accessible within this facility. Keeping budget in mind, should there be a push for some of the funding to be used in support of these organizations? I also support the method of reducing the number of kids in secure detention, since there are many alternative options that are likely more appropriate. Since there is planning for a facility with fewer beds, what is being done to support the community organizations and/or programs where the youth will be placed instead? Do those programs have enough room and funding? Are there already alternative placements planned? Some of the money could go to programs and community supports, since in the past, the decision for a youth has been secure detainment over other alternatives. This could be utilized in the areas where Promiseship and other collaboratives provide services to the families that come to the facility. And finally, a final thought is considering the integration of a program that would employ or provide internships to at-risk youth within the facility.
Great.
Thank you, Julie. Josh and then Kathy.
My name is Josh Henningsen. I'm an attorney here in town, but I'm a former committee legal counsel for the legislature that worked on juvenile justice issues, particularly related to detention and conditions of confinement. First of all, I want to applaud the corporation for taking some steps to make it more open. I think we sort of conflated the flaws of the process here with the merits of the underlying project. And so I think if we can close that gap a little bit and talk, like we've been talking in the juvenile justice community about some improvements that need to be made in our physical facility, and get back to the merits of the underlying project, I think will go a long way. What you learn about the juvenile justice and child welfare systems is it's really sort of an overlapping group of other systems. And really the court system is sort of the nexus of that. And so co-locating those things together, it really does provide, basically all juvenile court does is connect those different services together. And so if you can break down some of those silos and make that a more efficient process, it only works better for the kids and the families that are involved. I think there's, and what's important to remember that the county plays only one part of this. So the state, whether it's state probation or developmental disabilities or local service providers, there's all kinds of things that are going on here that don't necessarily involve the building commission or building physical structure. This is just one slice of the system. And what we looked at as we worked on things like timely case processing, eliminating shackling, eliminating the use of solitary confinement, is that the physical structures matter. We heard all the time that the design of a certain hallway in a certain courthouse meant the kids had to be shackled in the hallway, not just in the van, not just in certain areas of the courthouse, but they had to be shackled up to the door of the courtroom because of the way the hallway was designed, or because of the way a certain facility was designed. Kids had to spend certain parts of the day in lockdown because of the way that the supervision was allowed. So good design contributes to good practices. And I think these are things that we've talked about in juvenile justice and child welfare for a long time, and they were sort of pie in the sky because no one really thought that there'd be the political will to move forward on this thing. So I think it's important. We should support this process, and I really am very grateful to the county and everyone that's been involved to really develop that political will and move forward with this process, with the project and this process. So thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Kathy?
Kathy Moore. I'm a community volunteer who's been working in the child welfare and juvenile justice arena for 40-some years. And I don't want to repeat what's already been said, but I too am very appreciative of the openness of these meetings. I think this will take the process a long ways. I also think there would be a very good opportunity for the development of a children and family service mission statement for the community, which is something that's been needed for a long time, and that probably doesn't belong in the lap of the architects, but if we could somehow bring together a coalesced group of people who really felt as though they were contributing to the ongoing development of this process, I think that would be excellent. I know there have been a number of initiatives in the last 10 to 15 years around juvenile justice, but I want us to keep remembering that this is really a children and family service initiative. So I would recommend that we pretty quickly come up with a new name. The Family Justice Center, the Children and Family Justice Center, something that begins to remind us every time we open our mouth that we're talking more broadly than juvenile justice and more broadly than 15-year-old children, that these are infants whose lives are being affected by the decisions here as well. I absolutely support the concept of co-location and the inclusion of the youth center. I too, for the first couple of months, and I think in statements before the Administrative Service Committee about a month ago, I said, I could see both sides of the coin, but I think to put daylight, courtyard, and have the co-location really will become a best practice. So if we can continue to do that. I also know that when you look at the size of the facility, I was actively involved in advocating at the time the youth center was built and felt it was way too large at that time. I am very impressed with the decrease over the last decade in the population of the youth center, and I want us to stay on that trajectory. I've reviewed some data. I think there still are many, many kids who should not be in the youth center. We can look at the assessment tool. We can look at the use of community-based services. I've been trying to meet with folks, and I'm learning that there still are an array of services that aren't being utilized on a regular basis. So I think we're there. I think we're positioned for a smaller facility. And the last thing that I would say, which I think I indicated at a previous meeting, I believe the voice of the youth said it more completely than I can, but I believe this should be a hub for resources. And we're not going to look at co-locating every nonprofit agency, but I do believe there is a very strategic way that we can put case managers in a very open and inviting space, so that when a family first enters the system or first gets their court order and they don't have a clue what those services are they were ordered to go to, there's a place they can go and begin to get resource and referral and information. So I would stress that that be a top priority in the design of this facility.
Thank you, Jackie. So, Elijah?
I was hesitant to make a presentation, but I'm of the belief always that in these kinds of situations, the deals have already been done. For us to have to go to elements of minority participation and those other kind of things are traditional with us. But in this particular case, there's a spirit that hit in here that opened up the whole can of worms. 72% of all African-American households are single parents. We're talking about not a median age anymore of 16, as applies to African-Americans. We're now talking about a median age of around 12. If the structure itself would deal with that basic issue, of which I'm a member of DMC, which already identified over 20 years ago there's a disproportionate number of African Americans that are afflicted by this, you may not even need no building if you took care of your core problem. But the spirit does not want to do that, because there's always individuals who want to maintain the status quo in order for there to be a over $100 million building that the city councilman has to make sure that at least we get parts of that work from. That's where your issue is. And if the body does not begin to recognize that, you probably won't even need no building at the rate that we're going right now.
Thank you, Elijah. Any other comments from the public on this? All right, we do have a couple of action items to go back to that, oh, Ben?
Let me take a point of personal privilege, if I might.
Yes.
First of all, let me apologize to the board and the people in this room. My family has been attacked before, and I'm very sensitive to people coming. You can come at me all you want to, but coming at my family is a whole different ball game for me. And again, it goes back to our lack of sensitivity in terms of the fact that we still need to deal with the issues of race and racism. And we continue to dance around it, and then when things like what happened a little bit ago occur, we don't understand why someone takes as strong a stand as they take. But I have been attacked, my family has been attacked before. There have been articles specifically in the World Herald that are untrue and inaccurate as it related to my family back then. And I'm sensitive to it because people will print those things, and they will broadcast those things, and they will take the salacious part of what we do today and make that more the story than what we are attempting to do seriously here today. Let me say, first of all, that I've heard a number of times this rush that we're into. Marianne, you've been here longer than I have, and when I first got on the city council and first got on the building commission in 2009, Paul Cohen, who is besides the director, he's a friend of mine, as is his wife, who worked with me at Channel 7. And I asked Paul two things when I first got on the committee. First, how's your bride? Second, what are we going to do about the courthouse and the juvenile justice center? We've been talking about this I've been talking about it for at least 9 years. You all have been talking about it for substantially longer than that because I have covered it. So it has not been a rush to judgment. It has not been a fast process as people have tried to make it be. The other thing that was said about our children and our schools are failing, our schools aren't failing. We went from, in 2008, we had a 55% graduation rate of African American children. Today we have an 81% graduation rate. So we're not failing. Who's failing is the state by not providing the significant funding for schools that needs to exist. I'm not going to stay on this soapbox very long, but I just want people to understand, first of all, that when a white man comes in here and accuses me and accuses my family of something, and he has absolutely no proof, and comes in here and makes the statements, that's racist to me. And I'm going to address it every time. Thank you, Mary Ann.
Yep. And if I may, very quickly, those are the type of things that we don't need to happen during this discussion. This is too important to the kids and the families of this community, and that's where we need to stay focused and we need to stay grounded. We can disagree on the concept, on the design, on the location, on the programs. That's fine. But at the end of the day, it isn't about me, it isn't about any of you, it's about our kids and our families. And I really want everybody to know that our hearts, our guts, our sweat, our tears, our blood are all here for that purpose and nothing other than that. That's our job as elected officials. And so I do apologize, Ben, that happened today, that there is no place for that kind of stuff to happen. I hope that the media will focus on the good comments that were made today and how we move forward, and we're going to move forward together. We're going to talk these things out. There will be, at the county board meeting every fourth Tuesday of the month, and we're going to focus on juvenile justice on those days. We're going to have a website so that when you submit your questions, we're going to answer your questions. They're not just going to hang out there in cyberspace. We'll answer them. There was always the plan to bring this thing to the forefront to the public, and everybody knew that was involved in the project. And we can go back and Monday quarterback and say, well, we should have probably done it a little earlier. Well, we probably should have. But we can't go back. And now we have to move forward. And I'm asking you to stay the course with us, stay focused, stay clear about what we're here for, and that is our kids and our families.
Mary Ann, if I may have privilege just to ask a question, because I think what's been lost in this debate and what finally hit me, and I think the county needs to put this up at the forefront. I think when a lot of people hear about juvenile justice, they think these are the guilty, convicted, hardcore criminals that we're putting in a facility down there. But I don't think everybody understands that that's not the case. So I just think the county needs to tell the public, some of them who may not understand that system, that these are kids that are pre-adjudicated, considered innocent, and may be charged with simple something that may not be their fault, maybe the fault of a parent or something else. I don't think that's been out there. So I think the county
better job of that. Yep. Absolutely. Good point. So with that, we do have a couple of action items to take. We'll go back up to the approval of the minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of 8/3/18?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? Roll call.
Commissioner Borgeson?
Yes.
David Levy?
Yes.
John Christensen?
Yes.
Councilman Gray?
Yes.
And then we have two action items there, the public information commitment and the bylaws amendment to clarify the notice, records, and financial provisions consistent with the Public Information Commission commitment. Is there a motion to
Move approval.
Second.
Any questions or comments? Roll call?
Commissioner Borgeson?
Yes.
Councilman Gray?
Yes.
Director Levy?
Yes.
Director Christensen?
Yes.
And now is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all for being here today.